This is absolutely insane. The Cincinnati Reds are breaking out all the stops to recruit Kyle Schwarber with his impending free agency in mind. The Philly slugger continues to absolutely mash and is making his own case for the National League MVP, but there are quite a few wandering eyes across the league. Cincinnati continues to cement themselves as a legitimate threat to lure Schwarber away from Philadelphia, and I do want to highlight a little bit of a tip of the cap for what an impressive tampering effort that this is here. So to get right into it, I do want to start off with that before the matchup between the Reds and the Phillies yesterday, I'm recording this right before game 3 of the series here, that the Reds are pulling out all these stops for Kyle Schwarber. They just had Schwarber catch ceremonial first pitches thrown out by his dad and his youth baseball coach. Schwarber, of course, grew up less than an hour from Great American Ballpark, and this has been a storyline that has been evident across the series here. There does feel to be some legitimate momentum, whether it is from the front office directly or just created from the fan base, for what a perfect match this will be. Schwarber has been asked directly about it himself, and the couple quotes that he has, I wouldn't say downplayed, but the statements that he has made here is he was asked about his impression of Cincinnati along with free agents here, and the full quote that he said is, "If you ask the childhood Kyle that, yeah, why wouldn't you want to play for your hometown team?" And the full extension of that quote here is, being a baseball fan and growing up and watching Cincinnati baseball for your whole youth, that's how you fall in love with baseball. I think it would draw your attention, right? Schwarber said per Lauder. Being able to play for your childhood team is something that I think it'd be awesome. I hate that he's being a little bit open to this overall conversation, but I do think this is nothing more than a bit of just, negotiating tactics, driving up the price point here. That it was Dave Dombrowski's fault here for rolling the dice and allowing the situation to get to this point. That he had the freedom and both sides could have had those discussions and certainly did have those initial talks about what does that next contract look like. In the defense of Kyle Schwarber here is he is set to make the most money of his entire life, and he should absolutely be doing that. I just hope it is in Philadelphia that is the case. And I would like to think at the end of the day that if it is all things equal, Philadelphia is the place that he does want to stay. The only pathway that I believe for Schwarber leaving Philly or no longer being a part of this Phillies core is if somebody backs up the Brink truck and gives an offer that the Phillies are unable to match. I find it unlikely that will ultimately be the case. We know that the Phillies are one of the biggest spending teams in all of baseball there, that John Middleton, the owner himself, has been quite open about wanting to spend whatever is necessary to take this team to the top and get his trophy back to Philadelphia. And I just believe that Kyle Schwarber is a key part of that entire premise. Let us not brush over how effective that he has been this season. 42 home runs, 97 RBIs, a 373 on base percentage across his 441 at-bats. He's got 78 walks, 110 hits, and I always want to show a little love to those 10 stolen bases. And the interesting part about Kyle Schwarber, that age 32, it's like a fine wine. He continues to get better with age, and I do believe that this is something that is worth investing in. This is not a guy that is fading in the tail end of his career. He still looks like the prime version of Kyle Schwarber. He is a designated hitter, and that does feel like where he will ultimately settle. I don't believe that there's going to be too many experimentations for reintroducing him to the outfield, having him play left field, except out of necessity there. But I do think he's more competent in that overall conversation than he's sometimes given credit. No, he's not going to be winning a Gold Glove or covering a ton of ground at any point in those opportunities there, but you can live with Kyle Schwarber being in left field if the situation requires it. Now, when we talk money here, the price continues to drive up. That I think Dombrowski has to be feeling it right now that this was a missed opportunity. Whatever that window or whatever that gap in negotiation was between Schwarber's camp and the Phillies directly has to have grown wider. You have to believe the top end dollar for what he will command is higher than it was this time a year ago. And we got an interesting prediction that I did want to pull up here as far as the contract. And this article writes, the Philadelphia Phillies are trying to make a run at the World Series, but this season could be their last with Kyle Schwarber. Schwarber is going to be a free agent after the season ends, and he is playing like a player who will demand a lucrative contract. Former Miami Marlins executive David Sampson predicted what Schwarber could be looking for, and he said, quote, "You can bet that Kyle Schwarber is going to ask for close to $300 million in free agency," Sampson said on the Nothing Personal with David Sampson. Now, I do hold this with a little bit of weight, as obviously that is a guy who is a former front office executive and has a bit of a feel for things there. I do think that is pretty spot on for what the price point will ultimately look like. And to put that in context of what that means for this Phillies team here is let's take a look at this payroll. Zack Wheeler making the most annually on this Phillies team with $42 million and he has the 2 seasons remaining on that. Bryce Harper right there next with 27.5, and Trey Turner right below him at 27.3 there. Schwarber in this situation will be leapfrogging them in the order of operations. And I do wonder, I don't think this Phillies team has the personality of, pocket watching and keeping track of that. But we also remember it was this past offseason where there were all the reports about Bryce Harper wanting a contract extension. Now, he is still under contract for plenty of seasons, and there should not be a real rush to do it. But I kind of think if you give him the truth serum there, that what may be bothering Bryce to an extent is his top end dollar not matching some of the likes of the rest of Major League Baseball. That to call a spade based on his production and everything he's brought to this organization, Bryce Harper has been underpaid, even though that is an incredibly lucrative figure and more than myself and most of us will make in our entire lifetimes there. Now, for Bryce directly here, he is the face of this entire franchise, the guy that this is all built around. But Schwarber has been the absolute right complement to that, both from an on-field perspective, him being a true cleanup hitter when asked to, although he certainly has no trouble swinging the bat in the second spot or leading off when that is the case. We were doing the Schwarber leadoff experiment for an extended period of time, and it produced some pretty impressive results there. I also honestly don't mind that overall construct. I think that was pretty polarizing at the time, but there is no better feeling than just starting off a game 1-0, and Schwarber does that with the best of the league there. If this is the contract terms that we're sort of talking about, that would make Schwarber the second highest designated hitter, only behind Shohei Ohtani, who of course there is that little asterisk next by, as he will theoretically ramp up his pitching profile and begin to be on the mound at a more regular rate. We have not seen that come to fruition at this point. And it is also interesting that those are the two seemingly finalists for the NL MVP. I know there was some Pete Crow Armstrong love, but come on now. And by the way, PCA in an incredible rut that he struggled for a couple weeks now to this point, and I do believe should be fully out of this discussion. I do think it comes down to Schwarber and Ohtani for this year, and it will be interesting how much that price point does change things. I'm not saying that if Schwarber wins MVP, that dollar price multiplies, but it certainly helps his case even further there. I hope that Dave Dombrowski is sitting back here and saying, whatever the price point is, I'm willing to pay it, with John Middleton obviously mirroring that sentiment, with that being the money that comes out of his pockets there. But boy, that price point continues to climb. And I also thought about a team like the New York Yankees, man. Obviously, they are pretty loaded with outfielders and designated hitters already here, that it would be a bit of a difficult maneuver to actually get him into the lineup and make sure you can play him at the regular rate that the dollar figure would command there. But think about how much Kyle Schwarber would absolutely rake up home runs with that short porch out there. Now, Dombrowski himself was asked about the Schwarber conversation earlier this week, and I did a separate video on that directly, but just as a reminder for what he said was, quote, "I can't say one bad thing about Kyle Schwarber. We'd love to have him back in the organization for years to come. No, it probably won't be easy. We'll wait and see what happens." Now, obviously, he has to kind of keep his cards close to the vest here and be a little bit guarded in what specifically he is saying, but it isn't exactly the most reassuring answer that I would like to see. I understand that he can't say, we're keeping Kyle Schwarber under every single circumstance, because that likely is not the reality here and does no good to anyone to put that out in the universe. But that wasn't as locked in as this is our guy and he's going to remain in a Phillies uniform for plenty of time to come here. We will see what ultimately happens, and I do think the second half, well, I guess final stretch of the season and playoff run will sort of dictate some of the decision-making processes. That as much as I am a Kyle Schwarber guy, I understand the reality of when you look around at this Phillies team, there aren't that many positions that you can truly upgrade. That you're locked in with Bryce Harper, you're locked in with Trey Turner. You've got some key pieces that are going to be here for the foreseeable future, and designated hitter is a spot that is a little bit more versatile in how you can use that. So I do think there is a point towards roster construction, toward not tying up that significant of dollar figure in that specific position, but I do believe Kyle Schwarber is the type of player that absolutely changes things there. And the leadership aspect, I think, is really important as well. Dombrowski himself has been on record talking about he's the best leader that he's ever seen during his time as a general manager and president of baseball operations. But all this circles back to, just don't let the man leave Philadelphia. Give him whatever dollar figure he wants, however many years that he wants. That I'm not afraid of walking away from Kyle Schwarber if he's age 38 and still on this team. That is nothing that scares me to this point. This is about contending for a World Series right now, and you figure out the rest later. In all of those portions of that, Kyle Schwarber is a huge part of that equation. So Dave Dombrowski, let's get this done, and do not let him be suiting up in a different shade of red next year. We will see what happens as the offseason begins to creep closer, but let me know what you guys think in the comments, and would like to hear, do you have an updated dollar figure prediction for what Schwarber will command in free agency? I do think that number continues to climb and getting up into a little bit of the uncomfortable conversation territory, but nonetheless, the bottom line, the point being here, just do not let this man leave Philadelphia. Appreciate you guys for tuning in this video. video here. If you have not already, make sure you're smashing that subscribe button for us right here on Phillies Digest. Drop a like on this video in your comments below. I'll be back. Talk with you next time. Peace.